to have committee bill introductions. So if you have one, I would ask that you hold it till the very end because we have a legislator that's going to be late. So Representative McDonald, we will not forget you, and we'll request those introductions at the end of our meeting today. We are going to have a hearing on House Bill 2612 requiring school districts to be in compliance with all state laws and rules and regulations to be accredited, and requiring the State Board of Education to establish a process to challenge determinations of such compliance. We're going to open up the floor to our reviser, Nick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that short title provides a pretty good summary of this bill, committee. So, yes, as the chair said, House Bill 2612 would establish that the school district accreditation system that's established by the State Board of Ed has to require that school districts comply with all applicable state laws and rules and regulations to maintain the school's accreditation. So any school district under this bill that loses their accreditation because of a failure to comply with state laws or rules and regulations would be required to notify parents of the accreditation status change, and then also to regain accreditation, the State Department of Education would have to conduct an audit to determine that the school district has made all the necessary changes in order to comply with the state laws and rules and regulations. In addition, the bill would require that the State Board of Education establish a process that would allow for any person to challenge a school district's compliance or non-compliance with the law and challenge essentially the school district's accreditation under the law. And Madam Chair and members of the committee, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
All right, Nick, questions? Yes, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just give me an example, hypothetical, an applicable state law, rule, or regulation?
Well, I mean, this bill is requiring school districts to comply with all state laws and rules and regulations. So,
could you give me an example of a state law that would be applicable, just what you said? Your lifeline? Sorry.
Probably just one of the things you might get challenged on as a school district is your compliance with the non-academic tests, questionnaires, surveys, examination statute. I could certainly see a potential challenge under that if a school district is not complying with the law there. Plus, I mean, that's one of a multitude of laws that could apply. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for our reviser? Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this question's in regard to Section 13C that establishes a process for individuals to challenge compliance. So in 2023, Allison Sorensen, a Utah lobbyist for vouchers, was caught on a recording saying that she wants to destroy public education. If this law is passed as written, could she challenge school accreditation in the state of Kansas?
I mean, this law does not specify the individual who would bring the challenge. So the law does state that an individual and the state board shall establish the process for an individual to bring a challenge to a school district's accreditation. Okay. So it would depend on what the state board establishes and the requirements that a person may have to bring a challenge. So I can't really answer to that, but more than what I've already said.
Okay. May I have another?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I understand that as it's written, any school or district in non-compliance with any statute, regulation, or rule, like this could be uneven sidewalks in a building code or, you know, ADA compliance in an old building or something like that, is just boom, unaccredited. Then they must notify the parents in writing of the district, and any semblance of due process or coming into reaccreditation occurs after they lose accreditation first. Is that correct? Like, boom, you are out of compliance, so there's not a process. You just, if you have, you know, been deemed out of compliance, and you become unaccredited at that point. And then you have to notify parents, and then you get an opportunity to come back in compliance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if it's in a state law or rule and regulation and the school district is not in compliance with that law, the bill would require a loss of accreditation status and then the process that I described and you described.
Thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if this applies or not, but I would like to ask it on behalf of some private schools. The question was, KESA 2.0, accreditation of our schools must now be done at the district level. And under KESA 2.0, KSDE will no longer be accrediting individual schools. Is that correct, or do you know?
I'm not sure on that. I would maybe have to look to the department's accreditation staff and experts to kind of get into the details of their accreditation system and how it applies.
Chair, will they be testifying today? You know?
Yes, there are some individuals that might be able to answer that for you. We don't outline all of those accreditation rules and regulations in statute. However, I do believe that you're correct, what you're alluding to, that the State Board of Education accredits the districts, not the buildings. But it was prior to whenever they made their change, they accredited individual buildings. So you would know how an individual school was doing. I do believe that that was changed a few years ago, and they can speak to that when they're giving their testimony.
Thank you very much.
Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just brainstorming here, kind of along the lines of building codes. There are certain state statutes that refer to federal statutes or local codes. So would this consider them as well as state statute anywhere where it's referred up to federal or down to local?
I mean, if it requires a school district to comply with the law and the state law says that a certain refers to a federal statute as in effect on a date certain or something like that, I mean, I would say that that's state law and that is required to be complied with under this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, it appears that the bill doesn't mention any ordinances or any federal, just as if the state law requires the federal, as the reviser mentioned. All right, Nick, it doesn't look like there are any other questions for you, so we'll now go ahead and formally open the hearing on 2612, and we will lay the time schedule for our conferees. We have one proponent, so we'll give you 5 minutes to come on up. Mike O'Neill from KPI, and our opponents, we have 5, so we'll give those opponents 3 minutes. So we'll give more time to the opponents. There are more people, but we'll cut down their individual time just a little bit. My timekeeper is right here, Representative Getz, and he'll flag you down with a wave if you go too much over that 5 minutes. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Mike O'Neill on behalf of KPI. We ask that this bill be introduced, and from the volume of opposition that we have learned about, it is having exactly the intended effect. It's time for us to have a conversation about school accreditation. Respectfully, it's meaningless in Kansas as we currently understand it to be. Accreditation at this point in time, based upon the student outcomes that we're seeing, is akin to a participation ribbon. There are no districts that are not accredited. Those that are on what I would consider double secret probation have a plan of action. Some of those have been on that for a period of time, sometimes with resolution, sometimes without. So the opposition that I have read so far on social media has focused, rightfully so, on the new language. What I'd like to draw the committee's attention to is the existing language on what the accreditation statute means and what it was intended to mean in the first place. The state board shall design and adopt a school district accreditation system based upon improvement in performance that equals or exceeds the educational goals set forth in KSA 723218C, the Rose standards. We all understand those. The accountability measures are to be applied at both the district level and the school level. That's still current law. I understand that maybe the board and the KSDE are looking at doing something a little bit different that moves away from accountability for the individual schools, but that would need a change in the statute. But the accreditation is intended to accredit school districts. The accountability measures are intended to apply both at the district and the school level. The state board shall hold all school districts accountable through the Kansas Education System accreditation rules and regulations, or any successor accreditation system. So anybody reading the current law, and I'll try to make this as brief as possible in the time limitations that I have, anybody looking at the original accreditation law, I would suggest, assumed that one of the first things that would be required is that the schools comply with the law. And I don't think that's too much to ask. What I've seen in some of the responses is to try to find the most obscure law that they can imagine to point to that and basically trivialize what the original intent was by saying, well, if you're out of code or something, then you're not going to be accredited. Let's look at some of the things that this committee is already aware of that we have concerns about, not the least of which is at risk, not less than 2 legislative post-audit showing that audited districts are still out of compliance with appropriate use of at-risk funds, the building needs assessment law. So what is really intended here, and again, this is meant to stimulate a conversation, and that conversation needs to happen. Let's focus on what we all need to be doing, whether it's the state board, whether it's KSDE, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the legislature. You all have a stake in this. What are we going to do to get this ship turned around and start getting better outcomes? As I think I said in my testimony, it's an all hands on deck. We have got to that point where all hands on deck are needed. And that includes the legislature. There's a lot of pushback from the legislature getting in the way. I'd remind you to take a look at Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution. The Constitution required you to create the State Board of Education, who shall have general supervisory powers over the public schools and shall do such other things as may be directed by state law. You have the power to ask and direct the state board to do whatever the democratically elected legislature deems is appropriate. Article 6, Section 1 says that we are to develop a public school system for the improvement of our students. The definition of accredited in the KSDE, quote, means the system is in good standing, in parentheses they put compliance with the state board, and that they have provided conclusive evidence of growth and student performance. In addition, the system has provided conclusive evidence of an intentional quality growth process, end quote. That, if it's implemented, would be, I think, consistent with the intent of the accreditation statute. But looking at the student performance outcomes, I would challenge you to determine whether any of these districts are fully compliant and subject to accreditation. So I would simply ask that you rip the Band-Aid off and find out what we can do to make accreditation actually meaningful. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. As I'm looking at our proponents, we do not have other proponents, so I'll go ahead and take questions for you right now since you're our only proponent. Committee, do you have questions for Mike? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, you made the mention of the status of accreditation basically no longer has a valid point because no one's ever been removed, never taken off the list, so therefore it becomes meaningless. Is that kind of one of your points?
It is, maybe not quite that strident, but we see time and time again examples of districts that are not doing the things that we have asked them to do, and yet they remain accredited. And if you look at the intent of the accreditation statute, it fully contemplates that there may be from time to time districts that are out of compliance, and this is what we do about it. I tend to think, one of the things in the current law is that if a school is unaccredited, the superintendent of that school has to appear in front of this committee or the education committee on both sides. I suspect that they don't want that to happen. And they don't want the stigma, if you will, back home of a district being unaccredited and having parents then question their schools. But that's why you have an accreditation system.
Second part of that, if I might. So if using that as a basis, we've had a lot of pushback, incredible pushback against private schools, citing that they do not meet accreditation standards and they're subpar. Given the fact that no one is standing with a regular one, do you have any response to that?
Well, and maybe it's just an irony. You look at the results of the private schools that are maybe arguably unaccredited and their performance is pretty good. And yet we have schools that are supposedly going through a vigorous accreditation process under Kansas public school law. They're not performing well. So I think I would suggest that the accreditation system in and of itself is not producing the results that we expect.
Thank you very much.
Representative Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please define applicable? Are we talking building codes? Are we talking reports? All of the above?
I think that question is really one for the legislature to determine, maybe with I think applicable should keep to what it is that we want the schools to do that get better student outcomes. I'm not talking about whether your water system is up to code. And again, I think you have a bill that you're going to hear on Thursday that has similar language in it. I think that's 2650. I haven't looked to see if the wording on that, it has a similar requirement. But I think the word applicable is probably broad, overly broad, and probably needs to have some definition as to what we're really talking about. What specifically do we want the schools to do and required to do as a condition preceding to accreditation that is going to move the dial on student performance? And if it's not something like that, then it's not something that should threaten accreditation. But accreditation needs to be something that is meaningful, accountable, and as the current statute says, measurable.
Madam Chair. Thank you. Are you aware of districts that have had very low performance in terms of meeting proficiency chronically for multiple years? And would you be considering including them in your definition of applicable?
Well, I can't talk about a specific district. We do know the ones that were audited. We do know district by district what their student performance outcomes are. And so it may vary from district to district. But for example, if they are continuing to not use science of reading, for example. We heard a school board meeting the other day when somebody, I can't remember the district, basically said, it was asked by the board, are you still using the three Qs?
Three Qs.
Three Qs, and the teacher said yes, and they said why? And they said, well, because currently we don't have anything else. And there was some real concern expressed because even the state board is thinking no school right now should be using that reading system now. So that would be one in particular, appropriate use of at-risk funds to provide additional programs that are above and beyond, those are words straight from the statute, their regular classroom experience. We know who those districts are. LPA audited those, and we know who they are. You can go look them up. The other are the needs assessments. The needs assessments are supposed to be completed and then affect how the budget is done. And then you look at it the next year, and the board is to reallocate resources as necessary in order to have those students. And we know circumstances in which there's not a reallocation of those dollars. Those are the types of areas I'm talking about, that if the schools aren't doing them, they need to be doing them. And the board needs to require them to do that in order to be accredited.
Thank you.
Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, former speaker, for being here and talking. I want to talk a little bit about, I have some questions I want to ask you about specifics, particularly Section 6, when you talked about improvement. Does the Constitution talk about the areas that we should see improvement in?
You're talking about Article 6 of the Constitution, correct?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, educational, vocational, I think it's in my testimony there, I quoted it, I don't know it from heart. Educational, vocational.
It wasn't designed to be a trick question. I mean, and I appreciate.
You might want to read my testimony back to me.
Yeah, and it says scientific and intellectual.
There,
Are the other
scientific and
two.
intellectual. Thank you,
And,
Representative.
and
And again, not to be facetious about it, but that's, our founders of this state, when they had us enact Article 6 way back in the day, had something in mind in terms of what their public school system ought to look like and how we are going to play a role in improving those aspects of our children's education.
and you've been around education system for a long time.
A while, yes.
Do you see that any of those are obsolete at this point in time?
Oh, no, not at all.
And, you know, as we talk about this and we talk about accreditation, how many schools are currently non-accredited because they are not achieving satisfactory improvement in those 4 areas we talked about?
I'm not aware of any,
Okay.
nor have I been aware of any for decades.
Have there ever been a school closed that you know of because they did not exceed or they did not show improvement in these areas?
Not that I'm aware of in Kansas. Our neighbor has experienced that in Missouri, where the federal courts had to take over the public schools at one point in time.
So just a specific example, if a school district had 70% of or more of their students that were in the lowest quartile on our state assessments, would they be not accredited?
Based upon the existing accreditation law, I'd be hard pressed to say that those should be. Again, that task was given to the state board. And my point was, I would have thought that everybody, when they came up with the accreditation statute, would have assumed that the first order of business would be to comply with all rules. Now, it's up to you to direct the state board as to what may be the red line. You're here, you're accredited, you're below that, you're not accredited. I'm not here to make that type of suggestion, but I just think it's time to, as I said, rip that Band-Aid off and let's take a close look at accreditation. And in all fairness, the state board is looking at accreditation. I mean, we're tracking what the state board is doing. It's a painfully slow process, I must say, but it's not that they're ignoring. They seem to understand that we've got some issues there. But I'm just saying that the legislature also has a very important role to play in this as well.
I certainly appreciate your answers to the questions, and I want to close off with this, that the important word there is improvement. And I think as we look at accreditation and as the state board does, that we put in place a system that actually can measure improvement and accredit based off of that. And thank you very much.
Yeah, not much has been said about the fact that the current statute says that must be measurable. And I'm struggling to see how that measurement is being applied in a way that qualifies schools for accreditation. So I think that needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Okay. We have 2 more questions, and then we'll conclude with the first section, Representative McDonald and then Representative Getz.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm the newest member of the legislature, and as a member of this committee, I take it really seriously, and I want to be really prepared for each meeting. Twice in paragraph 3 and 7, you referenced that you have read the opposition testimony. I found that curious because I didn't have access to until lunch today.
I think I mentioned it's on public. We've got a lot of social media, so I think I said I was privy to a lot of the social media. I haven't read any of the opposition testimony.
I haven't had time to even read all of the opposition testimony, so I guess I have maybe my question is a process question. When we have bills put on our agenda at the last minute, late in the week, and we have these over the weekend, hard to meet, Madam Chair, when we have these hard to meet deadlines for testimony submittal, I think it just makes it very hard for us to do our jobs. So I would respectfully request that we be aware of that. Thank you.
It's a tough job up here. Representative Getz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple questions around one, excuse me, you mentioned a secret or double secret probation. I just wondered if you had any clarity around that or any statistics that just didn't want it to be a word that was out there, that if you had a meaning for that, give you a chance to give a meaning to that.
I probably should apologize for the use of that term. It's a term that many of us use when our kids are on double secret probation. There are conditionally accredited schools out there, and there's a definition of conditionally accredited. It means the system, quote, means the system is in good standing with the state board, and either the system did not provide conclusive evidence of growth in student performance or was not able to provide conclusive evidence of an intentional quality growth process. And so there are certain schools from time to time, and you learn about them if you track the state school board meetings, because they have to bring them up, discuss them, see what the plan of action is to get them corrected. And can't remember, specific districts, but we've noted that some are on that list for a while, and by a while I mean years, several years. And again, I think the board goes out of their way to make sure that there's no stigma attached to a district that's out of compliance. But at some point, you've just got to make a decision as to whether or not the school is going to cut it or not, or come up with new standards. And maybe, hopefully, you'll hear, I don't know what your list is, but hopefully you'll hear the status of what the board is considering, and you can ask questions of that. So again, I apologize for using the double secret probation. They are known, they're conditionally accredited schools.
I appreciate that clarification, and also around the needs assessment, that any statistics around that of districts that are not completing that or not completing it and implementing it. I've heard different things. I just wondered your perspective in that.
I don't have a number to give you today because we're still in the process of collecting those and literally querying districts as to how they're going about the process. The law itself requires the local board to do those assessments. Mm-hmm. If you look at the KSD website and look at their chain of command and how they recommend that it be done, the board is not involved in conducting the needs assessment. The board is involved in looking at it when it's done and then deciding whether they're going to make any budget decisions or changes in the proposed budget from that. We also have a bill that we've introduced to clarify that because the statute definitely says the board shall conduct a needs assessment. We've heard from board members who say we're not involved in that. The school hasn't included us in that process until it's time to approve it. So that's something that needs looked at as well.
And final one, Madam Chair, if I may. On the current results of non-accreditation, or even current and what this bill would enact, what sort of financial penalties, like what would becoming unaccredited do to a school district, or if it goes back to the building, what does that do? Is it a stigma? Does it affect funding? Are teachers worried about their jobs? Just what is the tactic?
Yeah, there's no. I think it's fleshed out more in the bill that you're hearing on Wednesday. This version basically was transparency. Let's have a meaningful accreditation system, and if they're not accredited, what you do, and parents need to know. But there's no funding trigger in this particular bill or ramifications. It's more stigma, and the example I use, if I may, it's a little like the question that we have as to whether or not the third grader who can't read should go to fourth grade. And then they still can't read, but they go to fifth grade. And the pushback we get from anything that holds them accountable or helps them with reading in third grade is we don't want them to be stigmatized by being held back. And I keep asking the question, would you rather have them stigmatized at third grade or when they graduate from high school and they don't have the skills necessary and they haven't really gotten proficient in the areas they need to be proficient in? I'd much rather have that be sooner than later. Same way with school districts. And that's why I keep using the take the Band-Aid off. And let's address this issue now. Let's not worry about it after you've accredited them for 6, 7, 8, 9 years and we still not getting better results.
Appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. That concludes our proponents portion of the hearing, and now I'll open the opponents portion of the hearing. And Representative Mary Lynn Poskin, you may take the floor. 3 minutes. Starting now. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee, for this opportunity to provide opponent testimony on House Bill 2612. You know, a theme of our K-12 Budget Committee work this session so far has been unintended consequences of hastily passed legislation from previous sessions and even instances where our proposed fixes need fixes. I see a plethora of disastrous consequences of this bill as written, and I will tell you that with Mr. Neal's assertion that it's overly broad, that is how it's written. So that is the bill that we are considering. We've heard that people out to destroy public education with no ties to our state could challenge our accreditation over practically any noncompliance. In October of 2021, the New York head of the 1776 PAC project tweeted that he was effing taking over our school boards, whether we liked it or not. In 2023, he went on Fox News to announce that the Blue Valley School Board race was his top target in the country, supporting the Moms for Liberty type candidates. Well, Blue Valley School District voters sent his book banning candidates packing, but this bill would allow him to challenge Blue Valley's accreditation? You know, assuming he figures out we're in Johnson County, not Pottawatomie County, as Fox News pinned it on their map. Those people can challenge our accreditation under the bill as written. And I say no, just no. Lest anyone think that I'm blowing these out of proportion, and again, Mr. Neal said, oh, people think you can do all this stuff. I would direct you to our southern border, Oklahoma, not Mexico, where they passed, for a lack of a better term, an anti-CRT law, which some folks on this committee have shown interest in doing here in Kansas. Tulsa and Mustang public school districts have had their accreditation downgraded for one activity in each district. Mustang even self-reported their activity for guidance from the state board, and Tulsa was penalized despite finding that they violated the spirit but not the letter of the law. Please, let's not be Oklahoma when it comes to education. Let's not weaponize accreditation. We've been hearing about districts being out of compliance with at-risk funding when the informational hearings clearly demonstrate it is near impossible to be in compliance. As written and as things stand today. Let's consider this possible consequence of this bill as written. An at-risk student in one of those districts who is scoring at level 4 was named a National Merit Scholar and has a lifelong dream of applying to a highly selective college. Boom. Someone declares the district out of compliance with a food safety regulation, and this kid has to send transcripts from an unaccredited district to his dream colleges. Wah, wah, sorry, kid. Your whole life's dream down the tube. Now maybe, just maybe, you'll still get in if you use some of your application space to explain this dumb law instead of highlighting your achievements. I could go on and on about the ridiculous consequences that are completely possible if this bill becomes law. It's like passing a law that would suspend a driver's license for any traffic offense or parking violation. It makes me wonder if the genesis of this bill is some sort of anti-public education bill mill or just poorly thought out. Or worse, perhaps these scenarios are features, not flaws of the bills. In closing, I find it reprehensible and the zenith of hypocrisy for this committee, which has been out of compliance with statutory funding of special education since
Point of
2012,
order, Madam Chairman.
to
I
levy
believe
these
our rules
draconian
prohibit us
measures
from
against our public
attacking
schools.
motivations.
I was just thinking that you are impugning as a representative. You cannot impugn motives of
I
your
understand
members.
it was a
So-
question.
No.
It was a question.
No, it was part of your testimony. So we do tend to allow that from non-representatives, but we hold each other at a higher standard. So your time is up. I'll ask you
It is.
to.
And again, it was a question.
To
Point of order, it was a question. And I will stand for questions. Thank you.
You can sit for questions. We're not taking them right now.
Thank you.
Next, we have Blake Vargas, Superintendent, USD 436.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly appreciate the opportunity to submit this testimony regarding the bill today. At Caney Valley, we've embraced the motto, every student, every day, and strive to not only meet standards for accreditation, but exceed them. School accreditation for our district is so much more than a series of numbers, completing reports, or debating how dollars should be spent. Every decision we make every single day as educators is how we can most effectively impact our students. We understand that schools are required to follow state laws, rules and regulations, and State Board of Education regulations that go along with this. In those instances where schools don't show growth or meet expectations, KSD provides support and guidance to help districts review their processes. If the goal is truly about our children and their education, accreditation should not be used as a punishment based on interpretation of a law, a rule, or a regulation. Instead, accreditation should only remain in the department with the tools, experience, and understanding to support schools and their students, which is KSDE. To strip accreditation from a district and only allow reinstatement after a KSD audit is especially concerning. In my experience, auditors are by their nature trained to focus on numbers and not necessarily the factors leading to changes that have affected those. Given the current workload burdening those auditors, increasing their responsibilities could compromise the quality and accuracy of their work. It's only fair to ask that the same expectations be placed on our legislature that is being asked of our school systems. Considering the state's budget history, it took multiple lawsuits before the legislature fully funded general education, possibly due to differing interpretations of what constitutes full funding. Regardless, I believe it's imperative not to entangle schools in legal interpretations, diverting them from their core mission of educating students. Schools are sufficiently overseen and governed by the state school board and our locally elected Board of Education. At Caney Valley, our local school board, who have a vested and sincere interest in our schools, and more importantly, our students, ensure that our educators adhere to the highest standards. If there is ever any intentional breaking of a law, rule, or regulation, our Board of Education would certainly address this issue locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. We're going to go ahead and do everyone that is in person first, and then we'll come back to Judith Dede, who is online, WebEx. Leah Fleiter, KASB.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to appear today in opposition to House Bill 2612. You have my brief written testimony, so I won't read it to you. I know that's the kiss of death. I've been on school boards where people sit there and read their agenda item, and it's very painful. So what I want to deliver today is a message that KSB wants to work with the legislature on our common goal to improve public education for all Kansas kids. Unfortunately, bills like House Bill 2612 won't help us achieve that shared goal. The bill appears to have been conceived without the input or expertise of Kansas school board members, administrators, teachers, or the State Board of Education. And each of these groups has a valuable, unique perspective that could and should be brought to the table. So we appreciate the opportunity to comment today. I would like to touch on the needs assessment statutes that's been referenced. That statute states, each year the Board of Education of a school district shall conduct an assessment of the educational needs of each attendance center in the district. Such assessment shall be published on the school district's website. Information obtained from such needs assessment shall be used by the board when approving the budget of the school district to ensure improvement in student academic performance. In the minutes of the meeting at which the board approves its annual budget, the board shall include that such needs assessment was provided to the board. The board evaluated such assessment and how the board used such assessment in the approval of the school district's budget. Based on Kansas Public Schools' record high school graduation rate, our 128% increase in career credentials earned since 2009, our 2023 state assessment scores that showed a hard-earned COVID rebound for Kansas teachers and students, and the fact that public school students often perform as well or better than their private school peers, it's clear that boards are assessing student needs in their budgeting processes. If you take the opportunity to visit our public schools, you'll be pleased to observe the quality learning and instruction that takes place every day. In the Better Together piece that all legislators should have received in your email inboxes this past Friday, there's a story about how the Derby School Board develops its budget by linking needs assessment to its strategic plan. It's a great story of how a Kansas school board works very hard to ensure student success through its budgeting processes. Here's a hard copy. I have a hard copy of each of these for each of you today if you would wish to read them. I couldn't include them in my testimony because actually they came out on Friday and I had already submitted my testimony. So I do have hard copies today. And please be sure to check your email, your legislative email every month at the beginning of the month, and you'll receive another one of these that has accurate information on K-12 public schools. KSB is committed to public schools where every child receives the skills, knowledge, and training they need to achieve their goals. Please reject House Bill 2612 and work with us to ensure a bright future for every Kansas child. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah. Next, we have Ann Ma, State Board of Education. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the State Board of Education in opposition to House Bill 2612. Besides being in conflict with current regulations and in derogation of our self-executing authority, I can't imagine who would want a district to have its accreditation pulled for some minor infraction without any due process. Can you imagine, as was stated, how hard that would be to explain to a community or to a graduating senior that now you've graduated from an unaccredited institution because of some minor infraction? The state board already has regulations in place to deal with districts that are not in compliance. We check 14 areas of compliance strenuously when we have accreditation come before us with the districts. We also already deal with complaints from individuals. The legislature should not create a private right of action for anyone who just simply doesn't agree with us. We get elected to make those decisions as you do. We welcome the opportunity to work with you. As was stated, we're making some serious changes to accreditation now to allow schools to focus on things we think will help us to continue the turnaround we saw in the spring of 2023. So we look forward to working with you. We just hope when you have ideas like this, it's much easier to put a great bill together on the front end than to try to fix a bad bill. So thank you, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Ann. And last, we have Judith Deedy, and she is on WebEx from Game On, Kansas.
This bill improperly usurps the role of the State Board of Education, is overbroad, and is bad public policy that would have significant collateral damage. As parents and community members, we obviously want our districts to be in compliance with state laws and regulations, but we also understand the huge number of laws and regulations governing them. We also understand that sometimes laws are flawed or open to interpretation. We also think we need to acknowledge the high rate of superintendent turnover recently and value the State Board of Education teaching them rather than punishing their students and their communities. We support the state board's model of working with districts to bring them into compliance. Pulling a district's accreditation for any violation without opportunity to cure the violation is a nuclear option. Removing accreditation would hurt students applying to colleges who would have to say their diploma is from an unaccredited school. Removing accreditation would also destabilize communities and harm property values for homeowners without solving student achievement issues. This bill reminds us of the approach during No Child Left Behind that was later rejected because of the harm inflicted on communities. We also note this law does not apply to accredited private schools, nor does it remove eligibility for the tax credit scholarship program for schools not accredited by the state. If the legislature deems this policy good, it should apply to private schools too. Thank you for your consideration of these and other issues relating to House Bill 2612. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Judith. So committee, I'll go ahead and open up the questions for opponent oral testimony. But before I do that, did I forget anyone? Is there anyone that was missed from oral? All right, then yes, Representative Schmoy. And please direct who you would like to respond to your question.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I actually have two questions. Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Is there anything in our current statutes that would offer encouragement or act as teeth for school districts to comply?
The statute requires the State Board of Ed to establish the accreditation system, and I think you heard some of the statutory language of what it is to include and how it's to hold school districts accountable. But ultimately, the State Board of Education establishes that system and determines how to accredit or not accredit schools.
All right, thank you. Second, really any of our oral opponent testimony, I get the feeling that we're stuck on the accreditation piece. Like that is the fly in the ointment with this particular bill. We are all seeming to be in agreement that there are areas that are grossly lacking and there are areas that we are not meeting standards that have been set in state law. So I'm just wondering if we're not talking about the accreditation, is there an avenue that you would be willing to come to the table and discuss as far as encouragement or teeth?
Thank you again. I think we're willing to put anything on the table, but if you think getting conditionally accredited doesn't hurt and get school districts' attention, I've got news for you. Just because no district has had their accreditation totally pulled does not mean the system is failing. I would say if we had to pull a district's accreditation, we all failed. We all failed. We should be working hard, and that's what we do when districts get conditionally accredited. We give them a timeline when they have to get things fixed, and believe me, they get high behind and get it done. There is teeth in the accreditation system. Nobody wants to have their accreditation pulled. That's the death penalty. So we work very hard with districts. We work with, and we have given a bunch of them conditionally accredited status, and believe me, and we give them timelines. We say, these are the things you have to fix, and they pay attention.
So there is nothing that right now you're willing to, you said that you'd put anything on the table, but there's nothing right now that you would trade for the accreditation, like something that you could offer us?
I don't know what you mean. What you mean trade for credit? I don't know what that means.
If we were to be looking at this, and obviously you're very passionate and understandably about the accreditation, and we are all trying to work together to make sure that the school districts are in compliance. Is there anything that you would suggest instead of us looking at accreditation?
I'm not sure what your goal is. First, you have to figure out what your goal is, and then we could figure out.
That would be to have the schools in compliance.
Well, that is accreditation. I don't know what else you would do, but if you have an idea about that, we can talk, but accreditation is the tool we use, and it's a good one.
All right,
All right?
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Representative Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple questions. Leah, I think maybe your perspective is maybe best. Was it you that mentioned the COVID rebound is
Yes, and the test scores.
okay? So I'm thinking in my mind, rebound, we're higher than we were before COVID. Is that kind of where we're at now?
The information we have from KSDE is that the test scores are higher than 2017 on state assessments. So that's pre-COVID. I would defer to the department on state
I
assessments.
think COVID started in 2020.
Yes,
So
it did.
that was my question. Are assessments higher than they were in 2020 right now?
I believe so. I would defer to the department, but the report that the commissioner gave had very high test scores, and that was back in September, October?
I guess maybe some stuff's been withheld from us as a committee, but the state assessment test scores we saw certainly didn't show 2023 levels higher than 2020.
That's correct. There was a 1 point and a 2 point rise in math and ELA. It was a slight increase, but it by no means is improved upon by where we were in 2017. We still have a very far way to go. We still have about 80% of our students that are not proficient if they're at risk, and in the 60s or higher for all students.
I would say, Madam Chair, that unfortunately that is misrepresentation of the data, that proficient, and I think we could bring the State Department into that discussion of test scores.
Well, I'm going to pause right here, Representative, because unfortunately, I'm not going to let you say it's a misrepresentation of the data when we know that levels 3 and 4 by the state board standards to the federal government is proficient. It's been talked about over and over, and it is also in statute. So we need to all be using the same language, and I am accurate in what I am saying. There was an increase in 1% or 2, depending on whether you're looking at math or ELA. So that is not debatable. And proficiency is really not debatable either, because I'm using the same language that the state board used when providing their data to the federal government.
That, I know, was a restriction that they had to comply with. The federal government said you can only use 2 levels. And so they said, okay, so we have to use 3 and 4. Now, today in Senate Ed, KSDE testified that level 2 was, what was the term? Who was? Meet standards. So that was today in Senate Ed. So when we use that proficient, when you're complying with just that federal piece of only being able to use 2 levels 3 and 4, that really misrepresents what's going on with the state assessments. When as a parent, if you receive your child's state assessment report, it talks about if you are at level 2, you are at a basic level. If you are at level 3, you are at that. So unfortunately, whether we mean to or not, when we're talking about that proficient, that's just looking at level 3 and 4, and that's not really referencing the state assessments and the information that's given to parents. I think that was the only point I was trying to make there.
Representative Hill.
If I could be provided with the average scores from assessments from 2020 and average scores from assessments from 2023, I would appreciate it, because I've never seen anything that looked like we were higher in 23 than we were in 20. So I would appreciate that. One more question that I have from you is that there's been some testimony provided, and I can't remember for sure whether it was you or other opponents about how devastating this bill would be to public education and would result in widespread non-accreditation of, and I'm not meaning to, but the question I have for you is, you're familiar with a lot of school districts throughout the state because of working with their boards of education. Is it your opinion that there's widespread breaking of state statutes throughout the state that would result in non-accreditation of schools?
No, but I think some of the concerns that you've heard today is that there are instances that could be raised that a district might not even know about. And I think that's some of the concern that you've heard today. Again, that was not my testimony.
Yeah.
I just asked that we just kind of start over and write a better bill.
And that's a point well taken, but I also think it's important to realize that I don't believe that our school districts are in widespread denial of state statutes. If they are, I would suggest that the Kansas Association of School Boards should be advising them to correct those deficiencies. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, if I overstayed my welcome?
Well, how about, you got one more good one?
Actually, to State Board of
Is it for me or?
Education and Ma.
All right.
Okay.
And come on up. 2 questions. That's it, Representative Hill. Then you're done. I'm cutting you off.
Thank you.
Now you've got me all.
Well, if you want to go back to your other question, I don't think 2023 results were better than 2020. Of course, one thing you have to keep in mind is we did not reach a constitutional level of funding until 2022, 2 years into COVID. And Wednesday, I'll be bringing you sites of research, showing you that impact. But anyway, we did bottom out.
Wasn't really
Hold on. Okay. First of all, we didn't have an assessment in 2020, so you're not going to be able to look at 2020. You're going to have to go back to 2019.
We're immensely better than 2020.
In terms of constitutional, we put over $3 billion in. If you look at the compounding effect, we started that in 2019. We did equalization as well. So to say, I almost am laughing in my head. We're changing what proficiency is. We're saying basic is good. And now you're saying, well, we didn't really get our constitutional level until 2022, which is bizarre to me.
What you said is not true. Nobody's changing what proficient means.
Yes, because I actually have email exchanges from Mr. Dale Dennis when I first took this job, and he told me specifically what proficiency was. It was 3 and 4. We've had this debate many times over.
Purposes, not.
It's a silly thing to argue over, but basic is not good. And having your students on the right hand, ma'am, I am speaking.
Okay.
When you're on the right hand of the spectrum and you have a middle and you have more than half that are not on the highest level, that is not good, and nobody should be championing basic, no matter what it should. Nobody's goal should be that when kids graduate high school in Kansas, they have a basic knowledge of math. They have a basic knowledge of ELA. But Representative Hill has the questions.
But I need to respond
I'm
to
not
that
asking
because
you
what
questions.
you said is not true.
Excuse me?
According to Neil Kingston, who runs the assessment center at KU, level 2 is on track to be college and career ready. It is not substandard, but that'll be in my testimony Wednesday. We can have that discussion.
It is on the website. It says basic understanding. And actually, I don't have my laptop, but Jennifer, you can pull it up. Basic understanding, if it says for post-secondary success, something like that. We've had this debate, but she can get the correct language for us. The reality is it's basic. Basic's not great.
Basic on track for college and career readiness, according to KU, who writes those assessments.
Well,
maybe we can discuss that Wednesday. It's in my testimony.
Yeah, I look. Yes, would you please read it?
Okay. I'm on your website. And it says, Level 2 indicates that a student shows a basic ability to understand and use the mathematics skills and knowledge needed to be academically prepared for post-secondary success.
Absolutely. They are on track
It
to
does
be
use the
career
word
ready.
basic, correct?
Pardon?
It does use the word basic.
Yes, but basic's not bad. Basic means you are on track to be college and career ready. I'll bring you the quote from Neil Kingston, and you'll see what we're talking about.
Well, I think that level 2 and level 1, as demonstrated by the Kansas State Board of Education, 2, our federal government said 3 and 4 is proficient, and it also said the goal was 75% proficiency in level 3 and 4. It didn't just say proficiency, it said level 3 and 4. If that's the goal, then we're far from that goal. And no matter what a KU professor says, basic is not great. Basic is not good. So,
Well, we'll just have to disagree on that one.
Representative Hill, yeah, okay, if you think basic is good, great. You go at it.
90% or more of the kids in level 2 graduate from high school, and 48 to 64% go on to post-secondary.
Representative Hill, you may ask your question.
Okay, we're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to, I remember my counselor saying, Scott, just get basic. I think I had a high school coach that told me that too. But anyway, my question is that as the representative of State Board of Education here, and we know that all these levels are set by the state board, and you determine cut scores and the whole works. And my question to you is, you talked about conditional accreditation. Does the board have a policy or a standard that they would say, and let me give you an example, that a school should not be accredited? So I think former Representative O'Neill, I mentioned to him 70% of the students at a level 1 for reading, for instance, or perhaps a absenteeism of 50%, chronic absenteeism. Would any of those, are there any criterias, any objective criterias that the state board would say, enough is enough? And I know I get all this stuff about we don't want to hurt the kids' feelings, okay?
Nobody said that.
No, I think the word was, it's a punishment of the students. And I did hear that it's a punishment of a student
Different than hurting their feelings.
to non-accredit a school. My question to you is there some level that we say it's a punishment to the students to continue that school?
If you're asking, is there a hard number where, let's say, if you had certain percent in level 1, you're going to be conditionally accredited, there is no hard number. They have to have a process in place to show improvement. So they need to be improving toward the ROSE capacities and the state board goals. So that would be at a different point for virtually every school. Are you improving? Do you have a process in place that will guarantee, will show continuous improvement? So no, the answer is, I believe, and staff can correct me, but there is no hard number at any particular assessment level, but we do check for a process and we do check for results. And I would say most of the time we have conditionally accredited schools, it was because they didn't get results.
And okay, let me clarify that just a little bit, because you said two different things.
Okay.
You said one, a process in place, and the other one you said was results.
Right. Those are the three things outlined in the regulations that Speaker O'Neill mentioned. There are three things that would get you in trouble. Okay. One is not being in good standing or not compliant. 2 would be not having a process for continuous improvement. And 3 would be not getting results.
But you just told me that there isn't a hard and fast results thing.
No, if you're not getting an improvement in results, so it wouldn't be a hard number. It wouldn't be like 70% for every district. If you have a very high poverty district, they might be lower than that, but they have to be showing improvement in the results. So it's like grow from where you're planted. Wherever you are now, we're going to work with you to get better. Does that make sense?
What you're saying to me that if a school district, third grade, 90% of the kids do not read at grade level. I know
Right.
that's a term that's bandied around.
Sure.
90% of the kids do not read at grade level. And 4 years down the road, 89% of the kids read at grade level, then that's, or 91, or 89% do not read at grade level. That's enough improvement that the State Board of Education would say, okay, you're accredited again.
I doubt that that would be enough improvement.
Well, what would be?
Well, we'd have to look at the school. We have 1,500 buildings, so, you'd have to look at that building, and the ARC does, and the visiting team does, and they all look at those numbers very carefully and work with the district to try to make sure they're improving.
So the bottom line is, it's all arbitrary.
It depends on where we work with schools where they are today. That's not arbitrary. That's working to help every school improve.
Certainly sounds arbitrary the way you describe it.
Well, I'm sorry that's what you heard. That's not what I meant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and before you go, Representative Estes, I just wanted to come back to that point because it's important. The phrase "and knowledge needed to be academically prepared for post-secondary success" is also found on level 1. So if level 1 indicates the student shows a limited ability, and then it ends with "in order to be academically prepared," that means they're really not prepared. If somebody has a limited ability, such as level 2, for academic preparedness for post-secondary success, it doesn't mean that they're prepared. So I just wanted to point out that that phrase is on level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Representative Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Board Member Ma. And just, I happen to have been doing some research on the state averages. And so, yes, in 2017, 37.2% students were proficient, and I think the other year talked about was 2020, but there were no tests done. And this year, that number is 33.17%. So, Board Member Ma, I use the definition of federal standards are defined in public law, so federal law 114-95, statute 1824, and they are defined, each student shall demonstrate that the challenging state academic standards are aligned with entrance requirements to credit-bearing coursework in the system of public higher education in the state and relevant career and technical education standards. So that's just that's where I'm coming from with my question for you. I want to ask, I think you also mentioned the rebound on test scores. When I looked at 2022 and I looked at 2023 math statewide average, the level 1s, which that's the one place we have common ground, there was a 1.06% lessening of students who were at the level 1. So it's an improvement, but statistically it's very small. With English language arts, that number was 1.05. And were you aware, is that the correct numbers, and do you consider that a bounce?
I'd say, after COVID, nationwide, and I'll have a link in my testimony Wednesday to show you what some of the national research shows and how much loss there was, particularly, the at-risk and low-income kids we've been talking about, how much they lost across the nation. And the data shows and the research shows it will take years to bring particularly these low-income, at-risk kids back, if ever. So yes, we're excited that once the constitutional level of funding was reached, that we started what we say, we think we hit bottom and we're turning around, and we're really excited about that. I even took a look at that Washington high school that we were talking about the other day, and they did a real nice jump. I was looking at level 1 because those, are the at-risk kids. They took a real nice jump in reading scores in 2023. So, and by the way, maybe we can talk some more about all the levels of support we give outside of the accreditation system. We do have to follow the federal laws on Title I, and we track all those schools that are in Title I and do everything we we are required to do by federal law in terms of providing different levels of assistance depending on where they are.
My follow-up question is, how many districts are currently conditionally accredited?
I don't know off the top of my head. They come and they go, you know, as we work with them, they can come off of that, but I don't know. Do you guys know? We can find out.
Do you know?
And if you'd like, we'll tell you how many we've conditionally accredited maybe the last couple of years.
I have been able to find that in the past on the website, and that's why I was on the website when the other thing came up. I couldn't find it. This time it's a little bit hard to find. It'd be nice if those things were easier to find. When you're looking, I'd also be interested to know what is the greatest number of years any one of those districts has been conditionally accredited?
Okay. Well, in my time, I'd say probably not longer than about 1.
Okay. Which gets in a concern for me, and I think this is where Representative Hill was going. I've expressed privately to you that I don't like a district level accreditation because some districts have one school who's doing very well and another one that's not, and to either student, it actually, I think it doesn't play out fair to the student. I wish we were accrediting by building. I know you differ. Just want to put that out there that that's what I'd like to see. So to get to my question, do you ever have a concern for the schools that have a very low proficiency rate, that even though they're improving, we don't get where we want, as high as we want, fast enough? And when do we all sit down and say, all right, we got to take something dramatic here? Because I feel like we do a really good job of articulating what our positions are, debating passionately, but we do a very poor job of getting to solutions and getting to kids first.
It never happens as fast as we want, but we did do something dramatic. We sunk $15 million into the one thing we thought would be the great equalizer, and that's letters training for teachers. And all over the state, we're seeing those reading scores turn around. What you guys might not be aware of is the state board took another $2 million of our discretionary money and paid, we couldn't find a letters for math, okay? There's just no letters for math. But we paid a company to develop for us a letters for math that we are going to own. And we're very happy with that. But right now, the focus is reading. And, you know, I know I would love, you know, to do building accreditation, but you know, I was on the North Central Association state team for 15 years before I got on the State Board of Education. So I've been playing around with accreditation for something like 25 years. But if we had to building accredit 1,500 buildings, just think about that. Let's say you had a visiting team of just 3 people, which is pretty minimal. We're talking 4,500 volunteers to accredit every building in the state. So we look at it by system because the system has to be producing results for every child. But we do look at buildings, and particularly Title I buildings, and maybe, you know, offline again, you and I can share about what we're doing with those Title I schools and the different levels of support we're providing and how we think that's producing some results.
I know statutorily a reference was made to when the accreditation system switched to districts. So at one time, we did get that done.
Well, not with every building. We did it differently, let's put it that way. So, yeah, we can talk about that. But there was a long time there we had no child left behind, that the accreditation was just send me your results every year, so it didn't take much to do that. There wasn't really very long when we were doing an in-depth by the building accreditation, because not everybody was with North Central.
Representative Getz, you're the last one.
Go ahead.
If you can be brief, sir. Who would you like to ask your question to?
And this is a follow-up on what I had asked Nick, the reviser, about now that you are only accrediting district-wide. And one of the issues that has now come up is that the state will not assist faith-based parochial schools because they do not have that same format. And so it's a discriminatory action against those. Whether I'm involved with the Lutheran education system, and I'm very much aware the Archdiocese in Kansas City of Kansas and their legal representatives are preparing that, in fact, it's been a challenge and may, in fact, be discriminatory against these schools. I would welcome your response.
Well, I know that with the private schools, we have been doing some building accreditation. It hasn't been district-wide. And with the private schools, it's kind of hard to define what a district is. I guess you could say it's the diocese. I support Topeka Lutheran until they close, you know. Maybe sometimes it's just one school. So I know that the private schools have been different. I know we've been talking to them about moving to a district accreditation, but I don't know where those talks are. And certainly, nobody would say the private schools don't produce good results. Of course they do. We've had a few private schools, to a comment you made earlier, we've had a few private schools be conditionally accredited, but on the whole, they do a good job.
But my question is, are we making it especially difficult or keeping them out of the ballgame, so to speak, by our current policies?
You mean today?
Within the system right now, because I'm very much aware.
I'm gonna.
I gotta quit. So
Well, I
thank you
know,
very
it's
much.
not that, it's not your question, it's just I want to stay on the bill. And so
But
we're
I'd be
getting,
glad to visit with you about that.
sorry,
so.
I am going to cut it off. We're getting into more of a discussion rather than answer questions about the bill. So, but I love the direction you're going. I just want to bring us back into the bill at hand. And Representative Getz, you have the final question. Would you like to ask a question or?
It's more of a comment. It's
You're
not
good.
necessarily the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank everyone for, one of my favorite quotes is pay attention to the tension. There's a tension here, and it's okay. Like, I think it's good that we are engaging the tension. Just this last week, there was a bill in water that was highly contentious, and it was almost exactly like this. A lot of opponents and one proponent. Like, it was very much like this, but it was at a very important topic to where we were engaging attention that hadn't gotten enough discussion. And so I thank everyone for the discussion. And the only thing I wanted to pull it back to is the core of this issue of money and outcomes. I got an email this week from a Mr. Fleming that is part of our tension here. And I feel like everybody's dealing with tensions, and we are doing well at it. It's just you're never going to win all the time. But in Mr. Fleming's case, he's a retired police officer, and he was emailing me about, and now he's now on a fixed income, and I'm writing to ask you to keep fighting for lower taxes and if possible to restrain school boards and community college from raising my taxes. Right now, the school boards and colleges seem to see us taxpayers as blank check to do whatever they want and continue their extravagant spending. I am all for improving the education system as far as academics, but what I'm seeing now is just ridiculous. As a homeowner, I am beyond frustrated with the amount of taxes we pay to try and keep our home and what we have worked so hard for. So I read that to demonstrate not just the tension in this room, that we're dealing with a lot of tension outside of this room, of how do we fund this in a sustainable way that taxpayers are not overburdened, and our regulations on our school system that even he stated right here, I am all for improving education. Everybody in here cares about that, and I appreciate the care and the questions and the concern. I think we're getting closer to dialing down on some of these details. I really do, and I appreciate it. I vowed to my district to try and be a peacemaker in a spot that is difficult to be a peacemaker. So this is my olive branch, if you will, at the end of, hey, it's okay. Well, at the end of these, for us to walk out of here and say, thank you for your perspective. I appreciate you giving it wholeheartedly. And I think we can do that today. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
All right, committee, House Bill 2612. We're going to close the hearing on House Bill 2612. And we are, made that mistake. We have two, Representative Schmoy and then Representative McDonald. Requests for bill.
I would like to introduce Bill number 24RS2682 on behalf of Graduation Alliance. This bill is in regard to establishing requirements for the determination of virtual school state aid for adult students.
All right, it is introduced, request introduction. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today I'm introducing 24RS2805 on behalf of the nonprofit Honor Moon, which was created and is run by Kansas high school students to provide period products free of charge in community pantries. It's an act requiring public schools and public post-secondary educational institutions to make menstrual products available at no cost to students and establishing a state grant program to reimburse schools and institutions for the cost. Thank you.
All right, if there are no other requests for bill introductions, we are adjourned.
No more mock questions.